October 1944, high above Germany. The sky looked calm, almost peaceful, as thin clouds drifted past at 20,000 feet. Inside a silver P-51 Mustang, Lieutenant Jack Miller fought smoke, heat, and fear as orange flames crawled along the engine cowling in front of him. The engine coughed once. Then again. Something was very wrong. Miller had launched that morning believing it would be a routine escort mission. Another long flight guarding American bombers as they struck deep into the Rhine. He'd flown dozens like it before, and the P-51 had earned his trust because it was fast, tough, and usually reliable. But now the cockpit smelled like burning oil. Warning lights flickered, and the engine temperature needle climbed past anything he'd ever seen. If the engine quit, he'd have seconds. Not minutes. Seconds. Miller was 24, a former auto mechanic from Ohio who knew engines better than most pilots. And as he glanced at the gauges, his mind raced through possible failures. Fuel line. Oil leak. Coolant rupture. He reached down, checking switches and controlled by memory, when a sudden vibration shook the plane hard enough to blur his vision. A hose had burst. Coolant sprayed everywhere. The Merlin engine was cooking itself to death. Quick thing before we continue, hit subscribe if you want more incredible WW2 stories like this. Because WW2 Vault dives into moments that sound impossible, but happened anyway, and you won't want to miss what's coming next. Here's what made this moment unbelievable. Miller didn't bail out. He didn't dive for friendly lines. Instead, he reached into his flight jacket, pulled out a pack of chewing gum, and made a decision that shouldn't have worked. The US Army Air Forces entered the war knowing they needed a fighter that could escort bombers all the way to Germany and back, something earlier planes simply couldn't do. German pilots had ruled the skies for years, confident because their fighters climbed faster, turned tighter, and carried heavy guns that shredded bombers with ease. They'd already crushed Polish and French air forces, beaten the British over France, and built a reputation that made new Allied pilots nervous before they ever saw combat. That confidence came from experience and success, and German aces believed skill mattered more than numbers, because in the early years it usually did. A veteran Luftwaffe pilot could take on several enemy planes and still come out alive, and they trusted their machines to bring them home. The Messerschmitt Bf 109 and Focke-Wulf 190 were proven killers, aircraft that had shot down thousands of Allied planes and created legends out of pilots who flew them. Against that backdrop, American bombers suffered badly, losing thousands of crews because there was nothing that could stay with them long enough to fight back. And every deep penetration raid into Germany meant watching friends die in burning fortresses that fell from the sky like broken birds. Everything changed when the P-51 Mustang arrived in large numbers during 1944. It was sleek, long-ranged, and powered by the Merlin engine, which gave it speed at high altitude and the endurance bombers desperately needed. American factories built them fast, rolling Mustangs off assembly lines day and night, because the strategy was simple. Put fighters everywhere. The P-51 could fly over 500 miles per hour at altitude, climb to 30,000 feet without breaking a sweat, and most importantly, it could stay in the air for 8 hours with drop tanks, which meant German fighters couldn't hide anywhere anymore. The P-51 wasn't just a guard dog. It hunted. Pilots learned to push ahead of bomber streams, diving on German airfields, strafing planes on the ground, and forcing the Luftwaffe to fight whether they wanted to or not. That pressure wore German pilots down, because even the best ace can't fight forever without rest or replacements. And by late 1944, the Luftwaffe was losing pilots faster than they could train new ones. The balance in the air was shifting, and experienced German pilots who'd survived years of combat were starting to realize they were facing something they couldn't beat through skill alone. Jack Miller had felt that shift before his engine failed, because German fighters were already becoming rarer sights. But on this day, trouble found him anyway. As the coolant sprayed and the engine overheated, Miller realized a rubber hose had split, bleeding life from the Merlin with every second. He couldn't land in enemy territory, and bailing out meant capture or worse, so he thought like a mechanic, not a pilot. He chewed the gum once, then twice. His hands shook, but his thinking stayed clear as he mashed the sticky wad into a rough plug and pressed it into the leaking hose, using a scrap of cloth from his flight suit to hold it in place. It wasn't pretty. It wasn't smart. It was desperate. But when he eased the throttle forward, The leak slowed just enough to keep the engine from seizing completely. The engine still ran hot, dangerously hot, and Miller knew the fix wouldn't last long. But it gave him something priceless. Time. He turned west, flying low to reduce strain on the wounded Merlin, watching gauges like a hawk as the smoke thinned just enough to see clearly again. Every minute he stayed in the air was a minute closer to friendly territory, and he started calculating distances in his head, wondering if he could make it to Allied lines before the gum melted or the engine finally quit. That's when two dark shapes dropped in behind him, slicing through the sky with deadly intent. German fighters. They'd spotted his smoke trail from miles away and knew exactly what it meant. A wounded Mustang was easy prey, a free kill for pilots who were desperate for victories in a war that was slipping away from them. Miller couldn't outrun them with a sick engine, and diving would likely tear the gum loose and finish him in seconds. So he did the last thing they expected. He turned toward them. The first German pilot opened fire, tracers snapping past Miller's canopy like angry hornets, but the American rolled hard, feeling the plane shudder as damaged systems protested every move. The fight was messy and close, nothing like clean training maneuvers. Miller used short bursts, careful not to waste ammo, because he knew he wouldn't get many chances with an engine that could quit at any second. The first German overshot, flashing across his nose for just a second, the pilot making the classic mistake of being too aggressive. Miller fired. The Mustang's 6 guns roared, sending 50 caliber rounds straight into the enemy cockpit. The German plane caught fire and fell away, spinning toward the ground trailing black smoke. The second fighter stayed disciplined, climbing for position, waiting for the kill like a patient predator. Miller's engine screamed, the temperature needle nearly buried in the red zone, and the cockpit filled with heat again as the makeshift repair started failing. He had one shot left, one chance to survive. When the German dove, Miller pulled up into a brutal climb, forcing the enemy to follow, using every bit of altitude he could squeeze from the dying engine. The P-51 stalled for a heartbeat, hanging in the air like a wounded bird. Then Miller kicked the rudder hard, rolled inverted, and fired blind through the chaos. It worked. The German plane shattered, pieces flying past as Miller blasted through the debris cloud, heart pounding so hard it hurt. Silence followed. No more gunfire. No more engines roar from enemy fighters. Just wind and a wounded engine held together by nothing but chewing gum and sheer luck. Miller limped home, nursing the throttle like a dying patient, landing on a friendly strip with the engine moments from seizing completely. Ground crews stared at the melted metal and the gum-plugged hose in disbelief, because nothing in the manuals said this should have worked, and mechanics with decades of experience had never seen anything like it. Stories like Miller's spread fast through squadrons, because they showed what the air war had become by late 1944, a brutal contest of skill, machines, and nerve where survival sometimes meant ignoring every rule in the book. American pilots weren't just relying on better planes anymore. They trusted their judgment and sometimes pure improvisation to survive impossible situations. By that point, American fighters were shooting down German planes faster than they could be replaced, and the Luftwaffe's early confidence had turned into exhaustion and desperation. Young German pilots flew with little training, facing enemies who controlled the sky and hunted them relentlessly without mercy. The numbers told the story better than words ever could. Jack Miller survived the war, but he never forgot the smell of smoke or the moment he shoved gum into a dying engine and hoped it would hold. He'd faced death twice that day and lived because he refused to quit, refused to accept that a split hose and 2 enemy fighters meant the end. What happened to Miller was happening across Europe as American air power tightened its grip, turning once dominant German skies into a trap where mistakes were fatal and experience meant nothing against overwhelming numbers. The Mustang became a symbol of that change, not because it was perfect, but because it worked, and because American factories could build them faster than Germany could shoot them down. By the end of the war, the US had built more than 15,000 P-51s, while Germany struggled to keep even 1,000 fighters operational at any given time. The Luftwaffe that once ruled Europe lay broken on the ground, its best pilots dead, its fuel reserves empty, its factories bombed into rubble. The sky belonged to the Allies. Thanks for watching this story from WW2 Vault. If you want more true combat stories like this one, hit subscribe and join us next time. because there are many more moments from World War II that sound impossible, but were very real.